You feel like the floor has been swept out from under your feet and you don't really know what's going on.
This is a film about student mental health and suspected suicide. When students returned to university this September, they were met with a university experience never seen before.
University students should stay at home and study online to prevent a second wave of coronavirus.
But the mental health crisis on campus started long before COVID-19.
We found out from the police, which was probably the worst moment of my life.
I'm investigating the impact the pandemic has had on student mental health and resulting cases of suspected student suicide. And I'm finding out what's being done to support it.
There's a mental health crisis with or without corona, especially among young people.
You're always left with, why? Why did this happen? And what could we have done? And that's the hardest thing, because often there isn't an answer.
I'm Hannah Price. I'm a BBC reporter, but 3 years ago, I was still a student at Bristol University. It felt like the right place to start my investigation.
That was my room up there. You're living with complete strangers, and it was just a massive adjustment, so I can't imagine what it must be like for first years now. I remember when the first student suicide happened while I was here. It hit me really hard, so that's when I really wanted to start investigating student suicides for the student newspaper, and I really wanted to find out what was being done to prevent it and what impact these deaths were having on the student community.
When the pandemic took hold earlier this year, the first thing I thought about was what it must be like to be a student and how difficult it must be. So I started to put in Freedom of Information requests to find out how many student suicides there'd been since lockdown started. A BBC Three investigation has found that during the first lockdown over March through to May, there were at least 10 suspected student suicides at UK universities, according to a Freedom of Information request submitted to 137 institutions. This BBC investigation also analysed local news reports, spoke to family members and friends, and found that since March, there has been at least 17 additional suspected student suicides, 12 of which took place since students returned to universities on September 2nd. I also wanted to see how these numbers compared to previous years, but I found little data around student suicide. For the purposes of this film, the term suicide is ruled by a coroner, and so a suspected suicide means the cause of death has not yet been confirmed by an inquest. As the charity Samaritan says, suicide is extremely complex, and most of the time there is no single event or factor that leads someone to take their own life.
So when I put in these FOI requests, I was really hoping that I wasn't going to find anything. But from these numbers, it's clear that we really need to look into this and what's going on.
In 2018, the university's minister called on vice-chancellors to prioritise student mental health on campus. So it shocked me to find there are still a significant number of students thought to have taken their own lives.
University leaders insist that campuses will be COVID safe and that they're ready to welcome students back. It comes after a warning from lecturers that restarting face-to-face teaching would be a disaster.
In September, students were told to go back to university, despite widespread concerns from scientists, unions and students. Millions returned to their accommodation and found themselves locked down with complete strangers. I wanted to speak with students who've experienced the unthinkable at the hands of the mental health crisis on campus. Finn Kitson was a first-year student at Manchester, who is thought to have taken his own life in October. Anna, Josh, Evie and Kate were all friends of Finn's from his hometown of Cambridge. Josh, Evie and Kate also started Manchester University at the same time as Finn and lived on Fallowfield campus.
What was Finn like as a person and a friend?
He was always usually the main one in the group who's the loudest, always happy, always getting everyone to have fun or whatever. Like, Finn was always the heart of the group.
Always putting music on, having a good time. He was really funny, like always making people laugh, especially I know when he felt at his lowest points, he'd make everyone feel good about themselves, even if he was feeling shit.
How did you and Finn feel when you both found out you'd be coming to Manchester together?
We were really excited. Me, Finn, and then one of our other mates, Joe, who's at Manchester Met. We were all travelling together around Southeast Asia. Finn, you could tell, was really, really happy when we were travelling. He was having a great time.
On your first day, did you see Finn?
Yeah, chucked all my stuff in my room and went straight to the pub with Finn.
Because he was quite an anxious person, he found it hard to speak to new people. But once you got to know Finn, it was so easy and he was so kind of warm, and I think he just needed like that extra push, I guess, to meet new people. And yeah.
I think we were quite giddy, to be honest, just like two little kids going to a new city, being let loose to go do whatever, have a load of money in your bank. And so yeah, I think we were really, really excited just to be at uni and with each other, knowing that we're about to have 3 years.
In the weeks leading up to his death, Finn was self-isolating as his flatmate tested positive.
When did you guys start to become worried that Finn maybe wasn't okay?
Well, nobody really heard from him in a couple of days, like 2 days or something. I heard from him one night when he was trying to come out, but then he decided not to, I guess, or just couldn't. So then that was the last time I heard from him, and then I think a day or two later, maybe a day and a half later, one of his friends, who's in Barcelona, Anna, she was getting quite worried and asking, I was like, have you heard from Finn and stuff? So that's when I felt like we thought something was up.
I was kind of getting worried because normally we text every day or at least check up on each other. So I called my friends who are at Manchester to just be like, oh, can you go into Finn's room and see if he's okay?
And then I went to go over to his flat to just check on him, but there was policemen outside, and I asked, is something going on in that flat, seeing if it might have been something to do with Finn, and they said no, it was another flat, so I just assumed that it wasn't Finn.
The hours running up to that moment were really horrible, because, especially for my friends who were there, because they were getting no information about what was going on.
When did you guys find out that Finn had died?
Well, Anna called me, I think, as soon as she found out, and she just said it, but then she just needed to process it, so she just kind of hung up straight away.
What was that like for you guys?
I couldn't believe it. I still don't really believe it almost. I think I just stood there and stared for about a minute or two.
Yeah, I think we said a word for like 20
no
minutes.
feelings. No, it was horrible.
Yeah, it's because it's really hard to believe, because it's not something that you can see. Like, it's just something that's not there, and it's just someone that's gone.
I felt like it was almost my fault because I tried to check on him and I got it wrong.
So it was so preventable, so easily preventable. Like, it just shouldn't have happened.
The garden area must feel like a prison exercise yard.
A few weeks after Finn's death, Kate, Evie and Josh woke up to this.
So we all kind of woke up one morning a couple of weeks ago, and there was just fences being put up all around campus with no explanation, no email telling us why they were there, what they were doing. It seriously felt like we were being caged in, and I'm sure so many people started panicking. I know I panicked. So many people panicked. I saw so many people even crying because they just didn't know what was going on, and they were so worried for everyone else.
If you're struggling on campus, those fences are telling you to stay in your room and deal with it.
Caging us in when we are being stuck in these halls. So just first of all, health and safety-wise, if we could try and social distance a little bit, and if we can all wear our masks.
There's a mental health crisis with or without corona, especially among young people. And the student deaths have been there since pre-pandemic.
Finn had a history of anxiety. When the news broke about Finn's death, his father tweeted, "If you lock down young people because of COVID-19 with little support, then you should expect that they suffer severe anxiety. The student referred to below is our son, and we love and miss him so much." I wanted to meet Finn's family to see how they were feeling. I went to speak to his sister Beth.
You feel like the floor has been swept out from under your feet and you don't really know what's going on. No idea whether you were coming or going. We were able to have a burial service for Finn, which was beautiful. For something so wrong, it felt so right. So Finn's favourite ice lolly was Fabs. Instead of doing a normal reading, I read out the ingredients list to a packet of Fabs as my way of saying goodbye. It was just Finn down to a T.
Do you think somebody checking in with him, especially while he was isolating, so maybe a phone call or a visit, might have helped him?
Finn didn't speak about his mental health too much, so I'm not sure whether people would have known. Suicide is such a complicated... It's so complicated. I really wish I had reached out to him and spoken to him. I don't know if that would have helped. What may have helped in the longer term would have been more of an understanding and longer term support from professionals. We must put student, staff and local community welfare, not just in terms of mental health, but physical, emotional health. We must put that at the forefront. Because otherwise there aren't going to be any students left to teach.
A University of Manchester spokesperson told the BBC, "The mental health and well-being of students is one of our highest priorities. We have made a very substantial investment in additional support, including a recently launched 24-hour mental health helpline. Our halls offer round-the-clock access to staff who can support students." In response to the erection of fences at the Fallowfield campus, the university told us, "A statement and apology was published on the 5th of November, an inquiry launched the following day, and a report issued on the 3rd of December. The report recognised the significant negative impact that the fence had on students. The university will work with students to find shared solutions to current and future challenges." But there was a worrying increase in demand for mental health support even prior to this term in lockdown. My investigation led me to another tragic story. Will was a student at the University of Warwick studying business. His family believe he took his own life. I went to meet his father, Quentin, at his home in Essex.
Yes, that's the field along there, and this is the end of our land. As you can see, just through the trees, that's St Mary's Church, which is where Will is buried. Will was a very friendly, happy, cheeky chap. Will got on very well with his brothers. He loved living in the countryside. He was just a home-loving guy who was a really happy person. I think when this picture was taken, he'd just come home from university. So yeah, just at the beginning of lockdown.
And is this one of all the boys together?
Yeah, we have a number of pictures obviously, but this was a picture I took of all. It's faded a bit, and unfortunately in the sunlight. But it's all three boys, and obviously as they grow up, they get bigger. So this picture is another picture of all three brothers together. Again, Will on the right there, the youngest. On the 25th of September, the day before he went missing, I had cooked a meal that evening, about 7:30, and we had a very normal family dinner, and we just talked about nothing in particular, and it was so unmemorable. Nothing particular that sticks in the mind, but it was just a normal evening. And he then went back to his room. And the last time my wife saw him was at 12:09, and we can be quite precise about that because he was seen on security camera footage.
When did you realise that he was missing?
Well, it was in the afternoon when my wife went and knocked on his bedroom door. He didn't answer. She opened his door, and the room was very tidy, which is unusual, but she didn't think anything of it. And we just thought, well, he must have gone off with some of his friends. He's got some very good friends locally, so we thought, well, a bit annoying he hasn't left a note. And then gradually got more and more concerned. By early evening, we decided that the safest thing was to call the police. And as time went on over the next couple of days, we were obviously very concerned. But the belief was still there that he was just simply off somewhere. Because he was such, in our opinion, we thought he was such an easygoing chap. The very last thing we thought was anything that had happened that was untoward. We found out from the police on the 1st of October. A police officer came to our house and said he'd been found deceased, which was probably the worst moment of my life. At the beginning of lockdown in March, he was very happy and everything was fine. But what became apparent to us later, as we did some investigations and checks with Warwick University, was that things were very far from being okay. Last time I met with his personal tutor was on the 30th of January, I think it was, this year. Over the ensuing weeks and months, he missed some work assignments, missed some exams, and increasingly frustrated emails were being sent by Warwick. The problem I had with all of this, and it's a problem I think that needs to be addressed very carefully by universities generally and Warwick in particular, is that they simply sent the emails, went through a process, even though they said in correspondence in the emails that his failure to respond would be taken as a sign of concern. I accept that these are unique times and that universities are having to learn, like we all are, how to cope with them. But I think they accept they had a sort of a quasi-parental role, if you like, and to be there and to notice when things were going wrong. That after his death, on or about the 26th of September, on the 29th of September, they'd actually written a letter to him, essentially kicking him out of the university. Quite extraordinary behaviour, I think, in my view, to do that without having even spoken to him, spoken to us, spoken to anybody.
What's next? What do you think Warwick and other universities should be doing to stop this happening again?
I think that every university needs to check its welfare procedures. I think the most important thing is to maintain regular contact with students. We didn't suspect anything at all neither did his friends. No one had the first idea that he was obviously suffering, but the only people who knew there was a problem were Warwick. And I think it's important that they change their procedures. So I'm not here to blame anybody. This is not a blame game. I'm not bitter and twisted and vindictive. I just want things to improve so that this terrible tragedy doesn't happen to anybody else.
Do you think if the university had contacted you, more could have been done to support Will?
Of course. I am personally convinced that had they contacted us, Will would still be alive today.
That was really hard. I think it's so clear, it's so soon since Will died, and it's just so clear how big of an impact it's had, like on the whole family. And I can't imagine what his brothers are going through. Him and his mum were so close, and Quentin really wanted to speak because he wants things to change for other students and other families now, like quickly. This is affecting students now, but for Will's mum and brothers it's still too fresh. They were just emails being sent off into the void, but are emails enough? Like, are emails enough when students' lives are at stake? I don't know.
The university say they made 7 attempts to reach Will by email, which went unanswered. They are now reviewing their procedures. An email was sent to Will to inform him that he was required to withdraw and to offer support. The board was not aware at that point Will was missing from home. They added, as young adults, the university is obliged to respect the confidentiality of its students and not share academic or any other information about them with anyone else without their permission. Warwick also responded to our FOI, saying they do not hold data or record student suicides. Warwick was one of the 96 universities who responded to the request by the BBC. Only 45 told the BBC they keep a record of student suicides or suspected suicides. We found that 2.5 years after the university's minister called for change, 47% of universities that responded told BBC News they hold no data on student suicides. Over half of universities that responded were unable to provide conclusive numbers of student suicides over the last 5 years. Some universities, including Warwick, have an opt-in scheme where students give consent for a parent, guardian or friend to be contacted if there are concerns. Universities UK, the representative organisation for the universities in the UK, say it's good practice to do this, but it's not compulsory. I found it interesting that Will's father Quentin was the first person who mentioned the quasi-parental role that universities are assumed to play in the lives of young adults to me. It made me wonder how the pressures of that perceived role could impact staff at universities, how they support students, and do they have everything they need to do so? During my research, a member of staff from the University of Nottingham got in touch. She's worked in the sector for a number of years and during her career has lost students to suicide. I wanted to meet with her to better understand her situation. Her words are voiced by an actor.
So I'm a personal tutor, which is a common role across universities, and we are the point of contact for students when they need to find out something from the university. We're often their first point of contact for support. I've got dozens of students under my care. We are seeing a rise in mental health issues among students, which means that the support services at university just haven't kept up with the needs of our students. So as a member of staff whose primary role with students is meant to be teaching, we're not trained to deal with complex mental health problems.
Some people would say that if a student is not attending, not handing in their work, it should be on personal tutors to ring up, do wellbeing checks, check they're okay. What would you say to them about how that system's operating?
That system's at breaking point. I absolutely agree that it's what we should be doing and it's what we want to do. If a student isn't attending, we want to know what's going on with them. But honestly, staff are so overworked and overwhelmed that if a student's not contacted you, some people would be like, great, I don't have to deal with this, I'll do another task. And it's not right, because the system is under so much strain. We're running on a system which hasn't fundamentally changed in 30 years, but student numbers have grown, and because staff have more tutees, it's easier for them to fall through the cracks. It's just a mental health catastrophe waiting to happen. You always wonder, is there any more I could have done? Could I have said something? Could I have spotted something? I don't have an answer to that. But if we don't talk about this awful subject more, we're not going to remove the stigma, and that, in turn, is going to prevent students reaching out if they get to a crisis point. It's had a terrible impact on my mental health.
In response to the claims made by the University of Nottingham whistleblower, the university said, "We invest more than £1 million every year in services to support student mental health and an additional £200,000 this year. Our staff are on hand to offer out-of-hours emergency support to students, as well as 24/7 access to clinical experts through the online platform Together All. The Students' Union also offers additional support services." I reached out to Universities UK to better understand why these institutions aren't recording student suicides and how, in their position of supporting young adults in a place of education, what further support they might need in doing so.
When there is a death of a student, it will be flagged in the university, and the universities normally would be signalling a student has died, And it goes to a number of different parts of the university just to make sure that we're all aware of what's happened. But we wouldn't at that point know the cause of death. And importantly, we shouldn't assume anything, because the law is very clear that whilst there may be an unexplained death, the coroner conducts an inquiry, and the coroner then determines the cause of death. The demands on the services are increasing significantly, and what I want to be able to do is to ensure that every student who is in crisis has somebody to talk to immediately, 24/7. And that requires staffing, it requires support. And I think that whilst we're all trying to do that, we are finding it really difficult. And you're always left with, why? Why did this happen? And what could we have done? And that's the hardest thing, because often there isn't an answer.
Since my time at Bristol University, more positive initiatives around mental health and wellbeing have started to emerge, and in some cases they've been developed by families who lost loved ones. TED Senior Foundation was set up by the family of Ted Senior, a graduate of Bristol University. He loves sport and everything about it. At the age of 22, he took his own life. I'm back at Bristol meeting Greta Lowe, a third-year student and welfare officer for the volleyball team. She's one of the student mental health ambassadors known as Ted's Friends.
I know that mental health has been an issue in Bristol for a long time, and I have had friends from home who have struggled with mental health issues, and as a friend or family member, it can be really difficult to watch people go through that. And a few months ago, we were approached by the university asking the clubs whether we wanted to partake in the Ted's Friends initiative. They provided us with really good professional mental health training and a really good support system within the scheme themselves. In sports in general, we don't often take the time to talk to each other, and for a lot of people, their sport is their main source of socialisation and discussing with people. So I think if we try and encourage an open community of talking about mental health and removing the stigma around it, especially in sports where people are we push each other to our limits and we don't want to talk too much and we focus too much on the sport, I think we need to take it back to talking about the human element to it and discussing with other people how we're feeling and how we can feel better together.
Do you think the kind of culture around mental health and talking about it has changed since you started?
I don't remember anything being in place the year that I arrived, either in my course or in my sports club. I definitely think that we have improved the culture around mental health, and we do encourage conversations with the committee now, whereas before it wasn't so much as a priority.
Hearing about Ted's Friends back in Bristol feels like I've gone full circle, but what's clear to me is I've only scratched the surface. University is supposed to be one of the best times of your life. When you're 18 or 19, you have your whole life ahead of you, and in the eyes of the law, you're considered an adult.
And as students are sent home for Christmas, it's hard not to think about the students like Finn, who went off to university and who will never go home again. It feels like students are finding it really hard to get support, and even if it's there, they don't always feel able to access it.
Universities UK told me the demand for mental health support from students has doubled this year and that universities cannot tackle this rise alone.